Welcome to the Augmented Advisor. Today, we're speaking with Devin Carroll of Carroll Advisory Group. Devin has delivered almost 50 million views via his YouTube channel, and he's delivered even more leads through his podcast. Today, we'll talk about how a straightforward approach to content creation has built a rapidly growing business. We'll also work through how he does what he does so you can learn how to do it too. And we'll talk about how the 1-2 punch of YouTube and podcast has created deep connections to his audience and his clients. Devin's approach is as sophisticated and successful as it is simple, and he was a joy to talk to. I learned a lot, and I know you will too. Here we go. Devin Carroll, welcome to the Augmented Advisor. Man, I'm excited to talk to you today.
John, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. And I found your YouTube channel and I was blown away. I mean, a lot of the topics you talk about are very simple. They're Social Security related. Like that's a big topic. And yet you've been able to generate almost 50 million views on your YouTube channel. And you also got a great podcast. I'm curious, do you have any idea of the stats on the podcast?
Well, I can tell you this, the podcast is substantially smaller than the YouTube channel. And I think that's worth noting, maybe not now, but later when we're talking about the differences between some of the different media channels, because there are some real differences between a YouTube audience and a podcast audience, and maybe some suggestions there of where another advisor might want to put their time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be a good topic of conversation and how that all works in the funnel, right? YouTube's good for part of the funnel, podcasting probably a different part of the funnel, and it really is all about the business and what this does for your financial advisory business. So tell me, what has it done for your business?
Well, it took me a while to figure out what I wanted it to do. After I started going down the road of creating media and started getting a little traction there, I started thinking, man, this is what I'd like to do full time. I'd love to be this content creator. And I started following some of the people who were doing this full time. And, I paid for a couple of courses and started really getting into it. And, I floundered for a little while because I didn't know, was I a financial advisor? Was I a content creator? What is it that I wanted to be when I grew up? So it actually took an unsolicited offer to buy my financial advisory practice to give me clarity on what I wanted to do.
Wow.
The firm came to me. They made me a great offer. And I looked at it, seriously considered it. There was just a piece in there that I could not get over. And, at the conclusion of that, I just said, guys, I'm sorry. I'm just not going to sell. And it was at that point I knew, okay, if you've turned down this offer, then you really only have one thing left to do, and that's grow the business. So you better get after it. And that's exactly what I did. I started reformatting my funnels, the content that I create. Everything that I did in the content space became geared towards sending business to the advisory space, which prior to that was two completely separate and distinct different things that I had going.
And so how has that worked out for you and for the business?
I'll tell you, it saved the business, plain and simple. If you really want to get down dirty on this, let's go back to 2012. Seems like it was just yesterday because I could still picture where I was sitting when I decided this financial advisory business, Devin, may not be for you. I had started off as a financial advisor in really late 2002 is when I started studying for my registration test. Early 2003 is when I got registered. I spent the first 8 years at a big firm. Then in 2010, I transitioned over to my own practice. And by 2012, it just wasn't working at all for a number of reasons. The way that I had been taught to prospect, the world was starting to change. And I did not want to prospect that way anymore. And without that prospecting tool, I was I was kind of a ship loose on the ocean. I was able to look at the revenue that was coming in. I knew what I needed to make. I knew what I was making. And I thought, this is just not going to do it. And I literally started sending out resumes looking for a job, a real job, an 8 to 5 type job. As the old Garth Brooks song says, thank God for unanswered prayers, right? Because it wasn't too long after that I was in a conversation with the person who's now my co-host of the podcast, John. And he had just come back from a legal conference. And at that conference, someone had talked on the topic of Social Security. And he asked me, he said, Devin, what do you know about this? And he started going over some strategies this guy was talking about. And, I probably bluffed my way through the conversation, but the truth is, I didn't know what he was talking about. And at this point, I'd been a financial advisor for almost a decade. And it may have been a decade at that point. And yet here was this non-financial advisor telling me things about Social Security that I didn't even know. But it didn't really humiliate me. Instead, it made me curious. I thought, man, in all of my conversations with other advisors, none of this has ever come up. In fact, we've been kind of taught Social Security is the icing on the cake. Don't worry about that too much. Let's get into the real stuff, the stuff that can pay you. And, I just never really learned what I needed to know about Social Security. And as I started diving in, I had a hook that got set in me pretty deep. And all of a sudden, I had that light that it takes sometimes to get yourself out of a dark spot. And that was hope. I thought, no one else is talking about this. I need to start talking about this. I need to start educating people on Social Security. And it started fairly simply. It started by doing workshops here in my local community. And I still remember my first workshop. It was August 26th, 2000. It may have been 12 or 13. I can't remember. I still have the ad slick that I ran in the paper for that. I remember being so excited because we had 22 people that signed up. Now, prior to this, my only workshops and seminars had been those individual, those types of workshops where we had a mutual fund wholesaler or someone like that come in and give one of their canned presentations, and we'd do the steak dinner, try to get the numbers, so on and so forth.
Basically product pitches.
Yeah. This was all on me, and I was nervous. But I remember after that event was over that night, I realized, yeah, you've got something here. You've got something that you can take. This is your lifeline. And there's a massive appetite for this information. So I started getting curious. I read Michael Hyatt's book. Right now, I can't remember what the name of it was called, but he wrote a book about blogging and about using social media and how you could use that to up your influence. And so I decided I'm going to launch a blog. And so I started blogging. This was 2000, late 13 probably. And, it didn't get any traffic, but it still gave me an avenue to learn and get that on paper, and then occasionally be able to share that resource with others. And I guess the thought was among prospective clients, well, if this guy knows it well enough to write articles on it, he must be an authority on this. So It started with the blog. And then I was at a conference and heard someone talking about video. How video was going to take off and become the new medium that everyone needed to be on. So I said, okay, it's time to start a YouTube channel. And let me tell you, it was awful. It's horrible. I ordered the $30 Cowboy studio lights off of Amazon, and I used my Samsung Galaxy S3, with no microphone. And I was just looking the other day to make sure that I had deleted those videos. I was hoping that I didn't, that I just put them in private.
All the evidence.
They were awful. I mean, horrible. So they were so bad, in fact, that I made a few videos, put them on my channel, and nothing happened. And I thought, well, that was a lot of work for nothing to happen. I'm just going to go back to being a blogger. And I did. I quit making videos. And I went back. It was about a year later that I went to another conference. This one was FinCon, one for creators that are in the financial space. And they were talking about YouTube revenue. And I thought, well, I ought to just check and see how close I am to being able to get monetized. And I logged in, and one of those videos that I'd made had 34,000 views on it. I remember being shocked. 34,000 views on this video that was not good at all, had good content. But then I also realized that there wasn't a lot of content out there about Social Security. So I fired the YouTube channel back up, and it started growing. And as the YouTube channel started growing, then the rest of the platform started picking up. We added the podcast later, and that gets us to where we are now. And if it wouldn't have been for all of those, what seemed like big doors, but swinging on little hinges, or going back through time, I wouldn't even be in business today.
And now we're sitting at 438,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
And a good video for you these days will get north of 1 million views. What a difference.
Right. I know, it's crazy. It's funny if you think about the influence that a video or a podcast can have. This summer, my 19-year-old daughter drugged me to a concert. And I'm not a concert
person. Who'd you go see?
Ready? Luke Bryan.
That'd be a great show.
It was. So it was, right? I mean, I certainly enjoyed the time I spent with my daughters. My wife went with me. We had a good time. A side note, I did not know there was such a thing as a $17 beer. But then again, I don't go to concerts. And it shocked me to see how many $17 beers one venue can sell. But this was a fairly small venue. It is an outdoor venue, and it holds about 20,000 people. And it was about full. And I was sitting there, and I realized that, if I make a video, look at all these people. And if I make a video and, I only get this many people to watch it, I'm not disappointed necessarily, but it's certainly not one of my more successful videos. And yet, with YouTube, I have the ability to reach all those people that were in that arena, sometimes on a daily basis. In fact, I do. I think my normal daily view count is 50 to 100,000. And then, when we have a video that gets hot, it gets even more than that. But yeah, it's amazing the reach that you can have some of those channels.
Yeah, and that picture really puts it in perspective, right? Imagine sitting in a stadium filled with 20,000 people.
Yeah.
And that's a bad day for you.
No. Right. It's crazy.
So what do you think made you break out? I mean, a lot of folks still flounder on the channels and on various social media platforms. And here you are. What do you think it was?
Well, I think it was a few things. Number one, to my knowledge at that time, there were no other creators talking about Social Security. In the financial community, it was still an ignored topic. And then I started talking about it. And now, there's a lot of people who talk about it, which is good, right? More information is better. But so I think it was timing. But the second thing is, I think I took a very humble approach to it as well. Because of the scripture that says humility comes before honor. And if you have a high opinion of yourself, that's too high, right? An arrogant opinion of yourself, and you really want other people to feel the same way about you that you feel about yourself, never make it on YouTube, ever, because it's a nasty business, especially when you're a smaller creator. The trolls on YouTube are awful. And if you can't ignore them or if you feel like you have to go in and delete them, it's probably not the place for you. So I think I stuck it out. And as I started growing, I did start to notice that the trolls became fewer and fewer. And there's plenty out there still, right? But it's not as if they pounce on a video and just fill it up with negative comments. Now, when we get negative comments, you have the audience who generally will come in, to my rescue, right? And start making some counter comments on that troll. So I think timing of it, and then just sticking with it, and not being afraid to look stupid, right? Not being afraid for these people in town to go, Devin, he's trying to be a YouTuber. Look at him. He's got 2,000 subscribers. I just didn't care. And it just kept growing. It kept growing. And here we are. Still small in my estimation, right? The YouTubers that I look at that have crossed that 1 million mark and then the 5 million mark, I think, man, how did they get there? This is going to take me forever.
Well, forever happens a day at a time.
That's right.
And sure, maybe you're not Mr. Beast, but I'll tell you, that's a lot of reach and a lot of power. And what really drew me to your content, and why I enjoyed our first conversation so much before we were on air, when we were talking about planning the show, you're just easy to talk to. You're straightforward, and the style of your videos for me is a perfect reflection of that personality. And it's a very different style of video than you see across a lot of YouTube. And I think it creates a lot of credibility.
Yeah.
And for the audience who's watching, we're gonna take a look at some of these videos here in a second. If you're listening, you'll be able to hear the sound, but I'd recommend you go and check out Devin's channel, and we'll have links in the show notes, of course. I think we're going to take a look. What do you think? The working while receiving Social Security video, is that's one of your bigger ones? Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it probably is. Yeah.
Yeah.
One
so let's
may not
let's
stir up
take
controversy, at least.
Yeah. Let's take a look at that, and we'll just play the first 15 or 20 seconds of it so folks can get a sense of it, folks can hear it, and then we can stop and chat a little bit about it. How's that sound?
Sure, yeah.
All right.
Hey, everyone, let's talk about the rules that apply if you want to work while collecting Social Security benefits. This is the earnings limit. And in today's video, I want to cover the rules that will be effective for 2023, and then answer some of the questions that I get asked all the time about these rules. Questions like, does the Social Security Administration look at single or joint income? What happens to benefits that are withheld if you go over the earnings limit? How is the earnings limit actually applied? When does the limit switch from an annual limit to a month?
So I'm going to stop there. And so for me, what's really interesting about this is, first off, this is what would be referred to in the business as a talking head style, right?
Right.
And its opener is very direct. Just looking at the camera, there are no jump cuts. There are no quick edits. It's just you and the camera. And eventually, around maybe the 20-second mark, you add some graphics to talk about and highlight the points. So talk to me about how you think about putting together a video opener like this.
Wow, John, I'd love to say that there is an incredible amount of intentionality behind this, but the truth is, I'm trying to deliver content that's valuable without fluff. And, if that means that we're not doing a lot of the B-roll and all of that kind of stuff that you see on these other videos, I'd rather just get right to it. Because there's one thing to keep in mind here is, who my audience is, right? If if my kids are watching my videos, they're not going to be the least bit interested because they're not even laid out in the format that they're used to with all of those things that you were talking about, with all of the B-roll, with the stuff that's trendy. Mine is just different. But I'm also talking to people who are 55 and up. And, I've got to first know my audience. And I think that's probably a reflection of how I do my video and set those up.
And I think that's a great point, because you're talking to an audience that still has an attention span. And
Right.
so that gives you permission to take your time and approach them very directly without any of the fancy gimmicks that you see all over YouTube.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, there's something on YouTube, for those of you who aren't aware, it's called a retention graph. It shows you how people stay with your videos. When you look at a retention graph from a strong video, mostly after the first 30 seconds, major drop off. I would imagine that on a video like this, for your audience, you, like everybody else, you have a drop off, but after that, I got to imagine it is pretty flat. People stay with you a long time.
Yeah, it varies from video to video at how I set it up, what I'm promising to do later in the video or whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's still certainly a drop off in those first few seconds that you see with the viewers. As benchmarked against other videos, I do think that my retention is likely higher when I look at some of the tools that are out there. But still, it's the ongoing quest, right? How do I increase retention? How do I get people to stay glued there for a little longer? Because ultimately, that's what's going to drive YouTube to continue to recommend this video.
Right, absolutely. And as straightforward and direct as it is, you do have some really great, simple, straightforward, though, retention structures. So this retention structure here, right? This is a sort of a listicle, right? And so now you're saying these are the questions that we're going to answer in this video, which helps the audience know what they're going to get, but also creates these little curiosity gaps that you fill in over the course of the video, which I think it's a fantastic way to do it. It's a great way to organize it. And as you say, really deliver value to the audience right up front. I know what I'm going to get, and I can roll through it. And the topic choices. This one, working while receiving Social Security. Where are you getting your specific topics? I mean, obviously the umbrella is mostly Social Security, but that's a pretty specific topic. And I'm pretty sure you're not doing keyword research on this, or maybe you are. So tell me, how do you get to a topic like that?
So some of it is keyword research. The other is, for example, if I have an article on my blog that I know gets a lot of traffic, well, I know that's a common interest area. I still get lots of emails. I still get lots and lots of YouTube comments. And, from all of that, you can kind of distill down what's important to people and start figuring out what is the information that they want to know. And the earnings limit is one of those big topics that people want to know about. And, that's where you start to get into naming the video. I could keep it simple and generic and say the 2023 earnings limit or Social Security, right? Or I can name it something that's probably going to resonate better with my audience.
Right. And in this case, it's really about, when I read it, I feel like that's the problem on people's minds.
Yeah.
That they're worried about, the thing that they're, can I do this? How do I do this? And so I should imagine that if you did keyword research on this thing, there's a variety of variations of that kind of search on YouTube. So you line up your title with it.
Yep, for sure.
And then you've got other videos that have done remarkably well, like this video. You've got the important SSA email you shouldn't ignore, which we'll do the same thing on this one. and we'll look at the first few seconds of this. But I feel like this one is it's a classic hook just in the name, and I love the idea of it. And this one, not as big as the other, but in terms of performance, in just 3 weeks, you're at almost 240,000 views. So this one's clearly doing pretty well. So let's take a listen.
Hey everyone, if you've ever been scammed, you know how scary that can be. When a thief gets a hold of your data, now they're into your bank account, possibly, maybe putting charges on your credit card, getting your passwords, doing who knows what with all of that information that you thought was safe. And if you get the emails like I do on a daily basis, there's dozens of these literally that come to me trying to get me to log into some fictitious site and give them my information. And all it is a phishing attempt.
So I love the unexpected start to this one, because you're talking about Social Security Administration and then you immediately go into phishing, which for me places this big question. Wait a minute. Is there, and I know that there's Social Security phishing emails, and I got a lot of questions going right now, right? So this one really revved me up. I loved the open here. So how'd you think about this?
Yeah, again, I would love to say that there was some scientific formula that I follow in those, but it's not. It's just knowing that, all right, I've got a very small window to engage these people that are going to be watching this. So how do I make it most engaging to make sure that they actually stay tuned for this content, which is going to be very valuable? And that was really it. It's just going through, kind of writing out that flow, then going back and making sure that those first key points didn't have fluff in it, that I wasn't, trying to pitch for some re-download or something like that. It was just the information that they needed to get them more interested in what it was we were going to talk about.
And are those some of the questions that you're thinking about when you're writing out the outline or the script for these kinds of videos? Is it remove the fluff, make sure that I'm getting the information up front as much as possible? Like, talk to me a little bit about the process that you use.
In the process of scripting out a video, I kind of take the approach to that, when possible, as you do when you're counting change back to someone, right? And that is to use the least number of coins that you possibly can. And so whether it's, in writing out a sentence or if whatever it is, I don't want to give them too much. Now, that absolutely flies in the face of the way that most YouTubers approach creation. A lot of YouTubers out there want to get that video over that, I think it's the 8-minute mark, where you can start to put your mid-roll ads in and start to have more control over things. And two, it gets you a little longer wait time. And so people will have this video that promised to reveal this one secret, and they take 12 minutes to get there. To the extent that it's possible, I want to avoid that. Now, I do have to set it up and give it the proper context, but I'm not going to have a lot of fluff in it.
And again, it does feel like that comes from who your audience is. Your ability to do that is, you're not trying to hook a millennial who's flipping through on their phone.
Right.
These are grown-ups with grown-up problems that really would like a real answer.
Yeah.
And you give it to them in the way that they want. And to me, again, what attracted me so much to the content that you create is it drips with that empathy for the audience, and both in the style, in the way it's delivered, in the specifics of the content. And yeah, it was what got me. So I'm the age probably of some of your audience members. So it really felt like it hit home. And even though your style of the video is, and your open is very unique to you and your audience across YouTube, you do take a pretty classic approach to creating thumbnails. And again, for those of you who aren't familiar with YouTube, thumbnails are what come up on the For You screen and a bunch of other places. It's really the way that a videos get selected to be viewed, right? It's a little picture with a title, and that's what you get. I'm curious, how much time do you put into the thumbnails?
There is a decent amount of time in just finding the right. I mean, the font is set. We know what the color structure is going to be. But then really the decisions that exist beyond that are: do we use the same copy that we used in the title, or do we use some different copy to try to, put the title and the thumbnail copy together to make it have a double impact? And then figuring out the graphic that we want in there. Is it an image? Is it actually a graphic? Do we want to use supporting graphics? So there is a decent amount of work that goes into that, because those thumbnails are critical to getting those clicks.
I can imagine. And you talked about doubling the title. That's a lot of YouTubers or do the opposite, right? They use the combo approach where the title and thumbnail are meant to create the message together.
Right.
But what's interesting is that approach where you doubled it, that's part of how you approached that most recent video, that don't ignore it. And I look at that thumbnail and it says, don't ignore this email, which is essentially what the title says. And it's got the Social Security Administration logo on there. And I just felt like that thumbnail punched me right in the mouth. It's magnetic. It really drags you in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of work
trial
there.
and error on those. And thankfully for any creators who are out there now getting started, I don't know that YouTube has rolled this out to everyone yet, but they now have an A/B test available within YouTube, within the Creator Studio, where you can experiment with more than one thumbnail, and they'll test that and start to give you the results to see which of those are performing better. So I have used that a few times. And yeah, it does. But once I create a really good thumbnail, I feel like the other versions are just variants of that.
Yeah, that someone that I learned a lot from about marketing and A/B testing once said, for most A/B tests, unless you're Google with billions of views, you have to test radically different ideas, or you're not going to get any information.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm sure that's true of this kind of thumbnail A/B testing. You talked a little bit about how you get started as an advisor, but I'd love to go back there. I mean, what drew you to being a financial advisor? Sort of how'd you get there, and what was it about doing that sort of work that pulled you in?
Well, I was looking for something different. So I can't say necessarily that I had this epiphany where I started to realize that, I want to help people with money. I wish I could say it was something like that. What actually happened is I was reading the Arkansas Democrat Gazette and saw an ad from Edward Jones that said, we're having a recruiting event this day at this hotel conference center. If you've ever thought about being financial advisor, come out and see what it's all about. That's how it got started. And once I cracked that door and looked at it, I thought, wait a minute. Yeah, this is something that I think I would be really good at. Because at the time I was working in outside sales. And obviously at that firm and in that era as well, it's not just that firm, but 2002, it was still a very sales-driven culture. And with the demonstrable sales that I had on my resume at that time at a very early age, I think I was 25 then, they took a look at it and said, yeah, we can get you hired. And they did.
What's your favorite part about being an advisor now?
I think seeing our ability to take people that are not confident, their retirement, which is what we focus on, and with our unique approach, being able to get them through and them to have that confidence and clarity about the next steps. I mean, that's pretty gratifying to see that you're able to impact someone's life that way. That's one of the things, and we could probably go on a long list of things, and not necessarily in the right order, but there's a number of things that I really like about it. I love the autonomy that I have, the freedom to take off. And for example, today, my daughter's starting high school next week, and I'm going to meet the teacher. So being self-employed just brings a lot of benefits to it.
That's exciting.
There's a whole list of things.
And at the same time, you love being a creator.
Yeah.
And you really wrestled with maybe doing that full time. To talk to me about the different benefits, it's not really about business benefits initially. It's really about how you feel. Like, what is it that draws you to this creation process? Because what people don't see is it's difficult, right? Creating a 10-minute video it's not 10 minutes long. It's about 10 hours long if you're not careful. So what draws you to that work?
Well, first, I would say that your estimate there is probably correct. I generally will look at a video and know that it's about an hour per minute of finished video. So it does take a lot of time. The content creation is really, it's about education. In educating in a way that's not salesy, being able to help people without them having to go to a free steak dinner seminar to get educated on Social Security, and they get pitched for an annuity or something. It's about helping people, and I get a lot of gratification from that. Just knowing that the education that I've put out there, although I won't hear from the vast majority of people that we reach, just knowing that we've helped them is a lot of gratification. Sure.
And where'd the podcast come from in all of this?
As we started the blog and started the YouTube channel, it just seemed like it was the next obvious piece to add to the content portfolio. So we added that, I think it was in 2017. And we started doing this podcast with my co-host from day one, an estate planning attorney here. And it was a lot of fun, right? But then the YouTube channel really picked up. That's when I probably went from 30, 40,000 subscribers, and all of a sudden I was over 100, and then it was cruising towards 200. And I told my co-host, I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep all of these things that I've got going. I've got to let something go. So we put the podcast on hold, and it was on hold for almost 2 years. And I realized sometime in that 2-year period, and I think I made a mistake. I think I shouldn't have done that. In the podcast rankings, we're already moving up the charts pretty quickly. When we did that, there was a lot of people who called me and said, "Are you serious? You're stopping your podcast with the momentum that you've got going?" At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. But looking back, I wish we wouldn't have stopped that. So 2022, I believe, we fired the podcast back up. Ever since then, we've been putting out episodes every week.
And very different topics compared to the YouTube channel.
Oh, for sure. And certainly a different format as well. If you look at a minute of YouTube video, think that it probably took an hour to get there. if you look at a minute of podcast video, it probably took a minute to get there, right? Because we have all of the editing and the uploading and
Sure.
all of that stuff outsourced. And, it is literally, thank goodness I've got a great co-host who, this guy could talk, and he could talk authoritatively about a lot of different topics. And he's kind of a curious person like I am. He's consumed a tremendous amount of information. And then with his background in accounting, then on to law school, and he's practiced as a lawyer now for 20 something years. He could just talk. And so I'm very blessed that we can sit down and we literally say, hey, here's the topics that we need to record today. And he'll say, all right, you ready? And we hit record and off we go. And so it gives us a chance to we effectively just have a discussion about this. And I think that has resonated with our listeners because it gives them the opportunity to be kind of a fly on the wall, listening in on two people who know what they're talking about, go back and forth on this topic. And, I think because of that, the show has grown.
And it feels very personal, the podcast. Very, and this is true, I think, of all podcasts. It's an intimate experience to spend time listening to somebody for that long.
Yeah. Well, and it is more personal because when I turn these lights on and I turn the camera on and I have this mic in front of me for the videos, you can try as hard as you can to act natural. It just doesn't happen.
Especially when you're reading, right?
Right. Yeah. And even the videos that I do that are unscripted, I look back at those and I go, man, that just doesn't come across as Devin that much.
Yeah.
Whereas the podcast does, because it's truly me having a conversation with a friend.
Right.
We're just talking about some pretty technical stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is amazing. It also gives you an appreciation for actors who are professionals who actually make things seem natural. You realize just how hard that is.
No question. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not cut out for that.
No, I couldn't either.
Well, now let's talk about how this is impacting the business. And one of the things we talked about before we hit record was about the way lead generation works for you from all of these sources. And I believe you had made some changes and ran some experiments. So I'd love to hear about how this is translating into leads for the business and maybe even a little bit about how that works with YouTube versus the podcast and think about your whole funnel. So can you talk a little bit about lead generation from all this content?
Yeah, for sure. So one of our primary goals with any of the content that we create is to not generate direct calls, people going to my website and saying, man, I listened to this podcast and Devin made a pitch for his service and I want to talk to him. That does happen sometimes. Our contact form do track where all of our leads come from. Got a good idea how many of those are coming from the social media, how many comes from YouTube, and how many coming from the podcast. But really what we try to do is get people on our email list. And then once they're on our email list, you can start to move them that know, like, and trust continuum to get them to a point where they feel like they're knowing us better. And then, the ones that end up liking us stay on there. Then the ones that end up trusting us actually set a meeting for a consultation. So that's really the focus, is to get them on the email list. Now, when they come onto the email list, it's usually because there is some incentive, right? It's not just, hey, sign up for my weekly newsletter. That would not be that riveting newsletter that I created. And some advisors are able to do that well, but I never could. And so I've always created some sort of downloadable that would give my audience a quick win, something that was packed with value, that would answer some of their burning questions very quickly. And I've experimented with a lot of different things, with a digital copy of my book, with, a number of things. But what I have used almost exclusively for the last 3 years is my retirement planning cheat sheet. It started out as 1 page, and unfortunately it's grown now into 3 pages, and I still get requests. Can you add this? Can you add this? And I'm pushing back on those requests because I know that, it's going to turn into an ebook if I'm not careful. But it's just something that gives them a quick reference. It's not anything too different from what people have seen that, they can get from their mutual fund product partners or someone like that. It's got tax tables, a lot of Social Security information on there, but it is something that, that we've curated and built into this based on a lot of the questions that we get. So I know it's valuable because these are the questions people are asking. Let's put that content in there. And it keeps people from having to search all these different places to find out, all right, what's the IRMA threshold this year? All right, what's the uniform lifetime table? What's the earnings limit? Things like that. So, it's a quick win for people. And, that I don't even know how many times that thing's been downloaded now, but it's well over 100,000.
It's primarily, so it sounds like you're driving everything toward this, this cheat sheet, which is that's acting as your lead magnet.
Yep.
And then you're going through the marketing process called nurturing, for those of you who aren't familiar with marketing. So you're then sending them an email every week or month, or what's the cadence after that?
Yeah. So for our nurture sequence, what we actually have right now is a webinar that I've done with a lot of success. And I'm just taking that webinar and breaking that up into multiple emails with a video in it. So the thought is, I let them know they've signed up. They get a thank you email. There's a couple of other welcome emails that they get. Then they go into the nurture sequence. And that's where we start moving down this path of helping them to create this ideal retirement plan, to give them lots and lots of things that they can think about. And, our open rate on that has been really high. Marketers would kill to have those open rates. And I think part of that is because they've started off expressing interest in retirement. So kind of know where they're going, right? Because they've downloaded the retirement cheat sheet. Well, now I'm showing them, how to answer the 5 questions that everyone should get answered in retirement. And we're doing that all in separate videos. And at the conclusion of that is how to tie it all together. And contained in that is a pitch for, if you want some help with this, we can help. Click here, set an appointment.
Got it.
And it's been pretty successful, in terms of sending new leads in here. So, if you don't have an email list, I'd absolutely start one. I'd get one going now because it's useful for a lot of things, right? There's a lot of talk about, these people that have a big social media platform, right? Let's take YouTube, for example, with my 438,000 subscribers. At the whim of YouTube, they could take that away tomorrow. It's gone. I would be left with nothing there. And it has happened. The same for LinkedIn, the same for Twitter, the same for Facebook. All of those different platforms out there could be taken away because, as some people say, ultimately that's rented ground. You don't own it. You're just renting it. An email list, you own it. And it gives you the ability to come back and reach those people, even if the rest of those properties have deplatformed you, if for whatever reason they have shut down, if people have quit interacting with those platforms, a number of different things. If you've got that email list, you get to control the conversation. So I think it's critical. So for example, with webinars, I do not advertise my webinars. Occasionally I'll put a social media post out, but I know a lot of advisors who do webinars will spend hundreds and even thousands of dollars in promoting their webinar. They've got a marketing officer that builds out ads. I don't have to do that. I send out an email to my email list, and usually within 2 days, we'll have 600, 700, 800 people that have signed up for the webinar. So
Wow.
It's a powerful, powerful thing that, unfortunately, I think a lot of people overlook, and they probably shouldn't.
Yeah, I'd like that to sit with folks for a while, that number, because I bet there are very few financial advisory firms out there that are going to drive 600, 700, 800 people on one of their webinars.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's possible just advertising to people you don't know very well. I think it's only possible if you have a real audience that you've then developed a relationship with over time. I don't see how else that would work.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably right. Now, a lot of that is based on my observations from trying some of the different ads on social, ads on Google. Nowhere nearly as successful as just sending out an email. Another example is my book. So we republished my book this year. I went through, rewrote it, republished it, sent out an email to my list. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how many copies were sold in that one day. It was well over 1,000 copies.
That's a good day.
Sold that one day. It was. Now we had discounted the book, so that probably incentivized some people. But the whole point was, let's drive it up through that bestseller list. Let's get some extra reviews on it, and why not show my audience a little love? Give them some price breaks.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fantastic. And I love the approach that you talked about in terms of that nurture sequence, because I think one of the things that you hear from advisors who are not regular content creators is, what am I going to write? What am I going to tell them? And this idea of taking a webinar, which many advisors do, and then breaking that down into bite-sized chunks is, I think, super smart. It's very efficient, and you're doing something that you really understand already because that's the thing you've delivered. But I love the twist you've put on it, which is deliver it as a video, because now you're getting even more familiar with your audience. They're getting more familiar with you. That's such a powerful kind of 1-2 of efficiency, but also creating intimacy at scale. That really clever. And I'm curious, after that sequence is over and you have the CTA, the call to action, asking them to, hey, if you want to get more information or you want us to work with you, give us a ring. After that, do they drop out of that sequence? They stay on your list? Do you email them monthly? How do you keep them active after that?
That's certainly an area that I need to work on. Something that I think about often. So what I would generally try to do is to have an email that goes out at least every 2 weeks. And in that email, I'm either including a podcast episode that I thought they would really like to hear. It'll be one of my podcasts. Or maybe it's a video that I just released that, I wanted to make sure you saw this. I am trying to stay in touch with them. Now, I don't send that out to the people who are in the email sequence, because I don't want them to go, man, this guy's sending me too many emails, unsubscribe. But for those people who have dropped out of that sequence, then yeah, I am trying to stay in contact with them just to keep it warm. Well,
it certainly worked. I'm curious, you described a pretty long journey, although the content creation and its success really seemed to accelerate quickly once you decided. I'm curious, if you were starting over today, is there anything that you'd do differently, or that you'd suggest somebody who's thinking about, hey, I love what Devin's doing, I want to do that too? How would you think about that?
So if you look at the different platforms that I have, the big three is my blog, and it's a Social Security blog, socialsecurityintelligence.com. It's not that active now in terms of me posting new articles there. So really what I have is the YouTube channel and my podcast. So if I track my metrics, say what is most impactful or what's important to me right now, if I could go back in time, I would put a lot of emphasis on the podcast. There is a different demographic that is on YouTube versus a podcast. There just is. The podcast is probably 5% of my YouTube audience. Still minuscule. Half of my consultations come from the podcast.
Wow.
And it never ceases to amaze me that with such a small audience relative to the YouTube channel, that it's having that much impact on my business. So I think that demographic difference is one of those where the individuals listening to the podcast are generally, can we just say it, smarter. They just seem to be more with it. A lot of do-it-yourselfers are out there, for sure. They've put the time into studying this. And, if someone's listening to a podcast in the car instead of sports radio or instead of listening to music, it's probably going to be a curious person. Curious people tend to be more intelligent. So no offense to my YouTubers for sure, but a lot of my YouTubers are also people that listen to podcasts. So we'll get people that will say, hey, I watch you on YouTube and listen to your podcast. And it does allow some of that cross-pollination between those channels as well, which certainly helps the podcast. So if I had to go back and do it again, and if someone said, Devin, you have to choose one channel, and I knew what I was wanting to achieve with that channel, it would be the podcast. No question.
And what do you think your best channel is for promoting the podcast? I mean, obviously the YouTube channel does have a little cross-pollination. I think you've got some links on your channel there, but where are people finding you for the podcast?
Finding the podcast. So that email list is a big one. And then YouTube. And see, here's the thing about podcast. Let's look at YouTube for a moment. Let's say that you decided, I'm going to start a YouTube channel and I'm going to blow this up. I have an endless amount of money that I'm going to promote my videos. I don't think you could put enough money into video promotion on YouTube to outweigh what their organic algorithm will do. Because once they start suggesting your video, things can get hot fast. With a podcast, there is no algorithm. There may be, if you're listening on Apple Podcast, which is about 75% of our viewers, and someone just happens to be scrolling to look at retirement, you might rank a little higher, but that's probably not going to push people to start listening to you. So you still have to rely on a podcast on either outside measures to get people to listen to your podcast, or to get your listeners to tell other people, or to go on other podcasts where people can learn that you also have a podcast, which gets interesting in our space.
Yeah.
Because then some people don't want to have you on their podcast because they're afraid it's going to take away from their business.
The pseudo competitiveness of our industry, which is honestly, it's crazy. With tens of millions of people to work with, there's no shortage of people.
Yep.
It is a little crazy. And for that reason, I appreciate you coming on my podcast here. And obviously I'm not delivering financial advice. We're a technology company, but still people are funny when you approach them about those kinds of things. As we come toward the end of time here, I wanted to get your thoughts on maybe a book or two or a podcast that you're listening to that really inspires you in terms of your creator's journey or your journey in life.
When it comes to material for my creative side, I'm really careful there because so much of that is geared towards the the crowd that is out there that is trying to attract a different audience than I am. So I don't necessarily want to emulate some of those other YouTube channels for sure. And then even on the podcast, we do want to be a bit different there. And our audience stays small. That's fine. So what I would say to someone that's wanting to learn more and wanting to get inspired is there's a couple of conferences that you really ought to go to. If you're in the podcast space, really ought to check out FinCon, really ought to check out Podcast Movement. If you're in the writing space or just doing the video, then probably FinCon alone would be great. But what that does is it gives you a chance to meet some of these other creators. I think back to the people that I've met in FinCon, who are also financial advisors and also have sizable podcasts, people like Roger Whitney, Benjamin Brandt, Andy Panko. These people are all people that I consider friends of mine. They've all been on my podcast. I've been on their podcast. And without having attended those conferences and learning some of those people, getting to know them, I don't know that would have ever happened. And then, I can watch what they're doing with their podcast, what's working for them. I'm sure they do the same with mine. And so just getting that community of collaborators that are very similar to you, that are willing to share, that's probably the biggest thing that I would suggest.
I think that's fantastic because we're talking about all digital medium here. And the suggestion is go out and meet people in real life and connect to the community of other people doing what you're doing. And that's how to get inspired. I think that's an inspirational message for me.
Yeah.
Devin, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a delight and I learned a lot and I hope you had fun.
Oh, thank you, John. Thanks for having me on the show. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, take care.